Cool. So hello and welcome to our kind of virtual stage crew series we've been doing here. Today we have Michael Broughton from Cornell University joining us. I've known Michael for a long time now. We worked together at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts in like 2008, 7, 8?
Ish. I think I started there in the fall of 06. So yes.
Yeah, so
probably 2007.
Fresh out of college for me, got to do a lot of lighting stuff with Michael out there. So good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. And we've just been starting these by talking about like how you originally got into theater.
Sure. So like a lot of you probably, when I was in elementary school, we took field trips to local children's theater. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. It was Lexington Children's Theater. And, they did. I remember seeing Lion Witch. I think I remember seeing Wizard of Oz. And I was just, I can't explain why, but I was just really fascinated by the sets moving around, the lighting, the sound, any kind of special effects. I was wrapped up in it immediately. When I got to high school, I worked on a few plays. The first was the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And the way it worked at my high school, because we had a really big auditorium and not a lot of us kids who were too interested in doing tech, we hired a professional sound person to, at least for all of our musicals, we hired a professional sound person to come in and put mics on everybody and run the board. So I tracked that guy down after school one day and basically insisted on being allowed to help him. And of course, he was, taking speakers out of his truck or whatever, and so I just started unloading stuff, and that sort of set in motion the next 17 years of my life. So let's see, I have a few photos. So this was sort of the beginnings. That was a picture of our high school auditorium. And I went to undergrad at Western Kentucky University, intending to do lighting design. They had a really strong theater and dance department. We had a lot of students who wanted to perform, but there were only a handful of us who were into design and tech. So the result of that was we all kind of ended up doing everything. Sorry to flip the screen around like that. So I did a lot of lighting design. I was pretty much an electrician for every show in undergrad. And I also did a work study in the scene shop for my last 2 years at least. So built quite a bit. And helped with props and paints when I could, especially if it was special effects. I'm a really terrible painter, but if somebody needed to paint the stage floor black or something, I was always good for that. And I have to say that at the time that I was in undergrad, I kind of wished that my department had the newest, nicest lighting and sound equipment and automated scenery and all of that, but we didn't. We had moderate budgets, not huge. And I think the result of that was because we had plenty of stuff on hand, but not, it was not all brand new or anything. I learned right off the bat in undergrad how to make, older stuff work and get a good result. And that I think that served me well down the road. Um, so this was a Midsummer Night's Dream that we one of the first shows I did in undergrad. I was not the LD. I was sure I was up on a ladder somewhere. We did Sweeney Todd. That was fun. The chair was one of those trap or had a trap door at the front of it. So after Sweeney Todd claimed his victim, the person would slide down into that cube. And my senior project, I guess, was ragtime, which I was fortunate enough to be able to LD. Kind of had no idea what I was getting into, even though I thought I did. But we pulled it off. So that was my undergrad experience. Yeah, I came out of there with a really diverse set of theater skills. I could hop on a soundboard, or I could design lights, or I could help props for a few hours, and that will help you go far, no matter what it is that you hope to focus on. And so during my summers, and I think this is really important for my own career path, during the summers after my sophomore, junior, and senior year of undergrad, I worked at summer stocks. So the first one I worked at was I was given a lighting internship at Williamstown Theater Festival. So instead of, I was kind of thrown into, they have a lot of Broadway talent, Broadway designers. So, you could take, maybe I was accustomed to working on productions with a budget of $20,000, and at Williamstown you could probably double that and add a zero for a summer production. So that was a very different experience for me, and really valuable. So I'll never forget this set because this was just one act in this play, and I was the deck electrician, and those walls actually went away entirely for Act 1 and Act 3. So they were pivoted to be parallel with the plaster line and then flown out on chain motors.
Wow.
And it was kind of ridiculous looking back on it, but it's the only show I've ever worked on when the curtain would go down for intermission. We would do our changeover, and the curtain would come back up, and the audience would gasp because they couldn't believe that we could change that into this. Oops, I changed it on my one screen, but not the other. Into this.
Oh, wow.
So I think this was Act 3. That was Act 2, and I cannot find a picture anywhere of Act 1. So maybe it's all just in my memory. I don't know. So
Yeah, that's cool. Like Williamstown is like really nationally known for producing really great stuff. So if you ever find yourself in the northwestern corner of Massachusetts, definitely a good place to check out. And especially like their internships. I know a lot of people that have gone through there over the years, and everybody's learned a lot and gotten to work with some really interesting people from what I've heard.
Yeah, so the internship, there were like 15 of us lighting interns, and that sounds like a lot, and yet we were busy all summer. If you weren't running a show in one space, you were prepping the next one, whether it was doing practicals, or maybe that next show was being focused that week, or and then they had several smaller venues that were for more experimental stuff where we would keep busy also. So it was we were everywhere. It kicked my butt, but I can't imagine how you could more quickly learn, you know, about all kinds of stage lighting than in an internship like that.
How many
Um,
shows were you doing in a season there?
I want to say there were like, so they had two, it all changed after my year. They renovated, and I know their venues changed substantially. So I was there in '04. And at that time, I think it was 5 main stage, 5 second stage, and then like 20 experimental or other productions. Um,
That's over
and
the course of like 2.5 months.
yeah, it was really insane. um, I remember thinking the concept of like lighting equipment showing up in multiple semi trucks seemed silly, and then realizing, no, we actually need all this stuff. And so I also got to program there, so that was kind of an interesting experience. I got to program for Don Holder, who was a Tony Award-winning Broadway LD. He designed The Lion King on Broadway, among other things, and it was total trial by fire. So you take a 20, I think I was 20 at the time, 20-year-old kid, and throw him in front of a light board that he's never seen before, and he's never programmed moving lights before. And on the other end of the headset is a very stressed Broadway lighting designer um, trying to get his show teched. And it was also, I don't know if your students have had the opportunity to do any moving light programming, but some rigs you can see the actual fixtures from the board, and this was definitely one of those rigs where you could not. And I find that makes it so much harder
Mhm.
because you're looking on the stage for the beam of the light, and you don't know how the light is panned or
Oh,
tilted.
sure.
And so it was really challenging. I like to say I don't know how I didn't get fired, but I don't think you can fire an unpaid intern. So that's probably the only way I made it through that one. And
You remember what board you were
it was
doing?
an obsession too. And my college used strands. So
Oh,
prior to sitting down at that obsession 2 with Don Holder on the other end of the headset, I had only ever programmed strand before. And we also did not at my undergrad. My lighting professor was not so familiar with tracking, so he didn't teach us how to use tracking.
mm.
So I definitely overwrote a few important cues for Don Holder, in which I should have pressed Q only, and I didn't. But I got through it. He was as patient as anyone could expect him to be, given the circumstance.
Yeah.
Um, and so then I went off and did something completely different. So that was after my sophomore year of undergrad, and then I took I wanted to move up. I didn't want to be an electrician again the next year, so I took a master electrician job at a much smaller operation called Theater West Virginia, and this was outdoor. Um, and they ran 3 shows in rep for the whole summer. So quite the change of pace. Um, but I learned a ton there. They probably had a lighting budget. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the whole season, maybe I had $3,000 to play with, and every piece of equipment that they owned was at least 20 years old. Some of it was probably twice that. Um, so, but honestly, I had the time of my life doing that. And again, a lot of theater electricians could rent a package from Four Wall or whoever and plug the stuff together and make it work. Not every theater electrician can take a bunch of stuff that's been rained on for 20 years and help the designer achieve their vision. So when you do gigs like this, it really puts your skills to the test. And so this show was about the Civil War, obviously. Um, and the other thing that really amazed me about this place was I thought the LD, this guy named Bert Scott, he was faculty at Florida State, I think. He, I I think when I was putting all those really old lights up and, making them work, I never really expected the show to look as good as it did. But I mean, they had two positions or three, I guess. One that was sort of like a box boom on the left side, one that was sort of like a box boom on the right side, and this back pipe that you see. And and they had front light, but it was like 300 feet away from the stage. So it was almost useless. So and yet he pulled it off. And I was always, you know, I couldn't believe it. So that really, just watching him work really taught me a lot. And
I can't tell, was there any sort of like ceiling or like
no,
amphitheater? Is it that's wide open up?
it's wide. It's wide open. When it rained, we had a night off, and that was pretty sweet.
One of the few
So
nights off in the like just as good as a snow day.
yeah, yeah. So so I took this picture at some point. I mean, those were literally the lighting positions. I had this on one side and pretty much the same thing on the other side. And that stuff got rained on all summer. And if we had a really bad storm, I'd come in before the show and find the gels blown out and all over the amphitheater and pick them up and go up on the ladder and put them back in.
Did you have to do any like real preventative maintenance on stuff like that? I've never really run an outdoor rig like that, or you just kind of kill the main breaker and fire it back up when you get it.
They probably should have. I mean, none of this stuff is made to be put outside,
Oh, no.
right? But but they did what they could with the amount of money that they had. And I mean, I took it all down at the end of the season, which was more than when I arrived there, it was all outside. So it had sat outside all winter, but I did take it all down at the end of the year so that at least in the wintertime it was dry. So that was definitely an adventure. So that was after my junior year of undergrad. And then after my senior year, I went to a place called Merry-Go-Round Playhouse up in Auburn, New York. I had friends who had worked there, and it was definitely so the scale there was not like Williamstown, but it was a few steps up from Theodore, Virginia. And I ended up being the master electrician there for the next 6 summers.
Oh, wow.
So that, and then I went on to be full time there, which we'll talk about in a bit. So that's where I found my home for quite a while, and in some ways, I mean, I only live 45 minutes from there now. So that's sort of what brought me to this area of New York. They did 5 musicals a summer rather. And I just, I really I like working there. I like the area. And in the off season, I had a number of gigs, one of which was Mass Mocha, where I worked with Zane. And then I moved to New York City. So
Where is Merry-Go-Round at again?
Auburn, New York, which is, so if you look at a map of New York State, Syracuse is almost smack in the middle.
Yeah.
So we're 4 hours from NYC.
Yeah.
I think my family from Kentucky, which is obviously much more rural, a lot of them probably think that I'm some sort of city boy now. But we live on a road with dairy farms, which I know you guys are familiar with. So after my first season at Merry-Go-Round, I worked at Mass Mocha, which is where I met Zane.
Oh yeah, I worked on this show.
Yeah. So so MoCA was really fascinating. They had this huge, I don't know if Zane has told you guys anything about it, but
Not
they
a
had,
lot, maybe like a couple stories here and
yeah.
there.
So they had a really kind of a giant black box, which is what you're looking at now. So they, we could build essentially a proscenium stage at the end of it. We could clear all that stuff out the next week and have it be an open floor or a stage in the middle somewhere, or set it up like a thrust.
Like a ton of those winger platforms. We have
Oh my
like
gosh,
we have
yeah.
like 14 of them that will like go to like 2 feet. But I mean, I don't remember how many we had there, but there were a lot of them, and
Oh yeah,
4 feet and risers, and we'd be schlepping those
yeah. They
big
moved them around with a
platforms all
forklift.
the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and they had a lot of truss. So wherever the stage was set up, you could, and they had pick points, so you could rig truss where you needed it, more or less. So that was a cool place. I cut my time there a little bit short because in the course of working at Mass MoCA, I met a lot of people who were doing theater in NYC. A lot of the people who came up to MoCA were living in the city, and I sort of got bitten by that bug. So I ended up moving to NYC after a season there, and
Yeah, I mean,
I
Mass MoCA was primarily an art museum too, which was like why it was really interesting to like to work there in their like theater production. It was sort of specifically sold as theater, but it was like any sort of production, really. A lot of music. They had like 3 huge galleries that like once in a while we'd like help out with like lighting
oh my
in.
gosh, yeah.
But it's pretty fascinating story. Like those Gregory Crutzen shoots, those were crazy. Um, so that was like this photographer who'd do like movie shoots for like photos. Really, really crazy stuff. There was a documentary about him on Netflix at one point where you could like see me carry something across the back at one point. So
I had forgotten about Crutzen. It's amazing. If I could tell your students anything, if you're allowed to take photos of whatever it is that you're working on, take photos of it, because I was getting ready for this talk and going back through my old photos, and I was kind of shocked by how many things I didn't have any pictures of. Um, but Zane is right. I mean, they built entire film sets for this shoot, for the purpose of taking photos, and the photos were really interesting.
like took full houses down and like brought them inside,
Yeah.
like full houses and like half of 2 other houses. They'd like build a giant swimming pool to like float a tree to like have somebody like they flooded a house one year, didn't they? Like
It sounds right. I do remember seeing pictures of, fake rain being made with the big tanker trucks. They didn't do that when I was at MoCA, but I do remember hearing about that.
so yeah, we can get into just about anything um at some of these places. So
Yeah, especially if contemporary art is or modern art is part of their name.
mhm.
You never know what you might find. Um, so then I moved to New York City, and so electrician work in New York City is very much a freelance world, and I would have liked a house gig where I could go to the same theater every day, but those jobs were really highly sought after, and I was really green, and so I freelanced, and you can stay busy as a freelancer in NYC. It I'm sure that people have told you guys this before, but it really all comes down to who you know. And, don't ever be unprofessional or rude to anybody, because that person could be your ticket to working next week, especially when you're freelancing, but just in general. And so I I got to work in NYC on some of the most unique stuff. Maybe I was just naive, but I don't think I knew that, for example, professional puppet shows were still happening and you could sell out a house for 2 weeks doing a puppet show. And so I got the Emmy, uh, this one, and what you're looking at is set up in a black box theater. And, you know, puppet puppet shows are interesting. They pack a ton of lights around this little proscenium arch, and they all have to be very precisely shuttered so that you see the puppets and you don't see the performers. I mean, if you think that you've seen a lighting designer be OCD about a shutter cut before, you should really work on a puppet show. It it definitely gets onto a different level there. And so that was one of the cooler things I got to do. Um, I did several shows with the Manus Opera, so it's a very small world. Even in New York City, the theater world is very small, and I was watching a few of your guys' previous people who had done what I'm doing now on your website, and one guy, blanking on his name, said he worked at the New School and with
Oh,
the Manus Opera.
yeah.
So I mean, I didn't work with him there because we were there at different times, but I was at Emmy and that's some of those same venues.
Mhm.
And so I worked um, some opera, some theater. Never saw it coming, but a lot of events. So in NYC, if you're a lighting person, um, you might find yourself in a play, or you might find yourself uh, here on top of a truss tower focusing park hands. Um, and So I did this gig for several years. A buddy of mine was the LD, and it was Bryant Park, Winter Village. We set up lights for the skating rink, and we also set up LEDs in all these, the building where you rent your skates, and then the far building that you see on the left is like a restaurant. Um, so that was a good gig for several years. We were always cold, but you could just snuggle up with a 1,000-watt park hand if you were really starting to suffer. Um, and worked for a company that did a lot of work at the Museum of Natural History. Worked for a company that did some work at the Met. Never knew this before, but it's not surprising. Security at museums is absolutely insane. If you're there after hours setting up lights, you will likely have a security guard whose job it is to follow you around and watch you work.
Mhm.
So that took a little bit of getting used to, but they're all cool. That was me focusing lights in Bryant Park one day. Um, and and then I worked for a few companies that did these really expensive weddings or dinners. This is a venue on Wall Street, um, and I did not. I didn't have any photos from events that I did there, so I just pulled this one off their website. But I set up a lot of things like this, where you were focusing the light on the centerpiece of a table, and driving around a scissor lift, trying to not run into anything expensive. Um, so um, I remember we did shareholder meetings. I did something for Toyota at some point. Um, by far, and I cannot believe I can't find any pictures of it, but by far the most elaborate corporate event I ever did was um, Comedy Central had a after party for the 2008 presidential election coverage. So their election coverage was referred to as Indecision 2008. And they had this huge bash afterwards at the Park Restaurant in Chelsea. And I never would have thought that you could put about 30 DMX universes worth of LEDs in a small restaurant, but we did. And at that time, LED was kind of exploding onto the scene as far, in stage lighting or event lighting. So it was all new to me. It's the first time I ever saw somebody use, so they ran it all off of a lighting board called a Grand MA2. And they used projection mapping, so they could actually like have videos of an American flag waving and have the LEDs, LED lighting fixtures portray that. And it was, I can't believe I didn't take any pictures. So you're just going to have to go
Yeah.
with my description. It was, especially in 2008, that was brand new then,
Worked a much smaller party that night, but New York City was wild that night.
Were they? I remember people screaming in the streets, in a good way. It was crazy.
Yeah, we had a really big show, like a big election party at New World. I can't remember the premise, but there were a bunch of bands and all this stuff. And
yeah,
my wife met Sigourney Weaver outside celebrating one night there on election night.
That's cool. Wow. So while I was living in the city, I took a tour with Moscow Ballet, which sounds maybe a little more prestigious than it actually is, but I learned a ton on that. And so we did the Great Russian Nutcracker, and went all up and down the East Coast and for 2 months, November and December, doing one-offs. So we were in a different venue every night. And I have to say, touring, that was our bus. We somehow, the bus company that they contracted with, the old crappy one that we were supposed to get, had broken down. So we ended up riding around in this Rockstar bus, which we were pretty happy about. But I found that that's really what touring can make or break a lighting tech. And especially doing one-offs, for a company with a modest but by no means high budget, they threw us in this arena one night. We went to some houses like the Landmark Theater in Syracuse, where they had this absolutely amazing facility and a union crew of stagehands who knew exactly what they were doing and followed instructions. And then we would play houses. We played one in Mississippi where nobody there except for us knew the difference between a piece of stage pen, cable, and DMX, So you really, we went to one venue where they did not have power for us we toured with our own system, but they didn't have power for us to tie it into. So we had to use theirs, and theirs was in disrepair. So, but the show must go on, and it did. We still performed the Nutcracker that night. I wouldn't say the lighting was good, but you could see. And that was about, in 4 hours, that's about as far as I could get that one.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up, long story that I won't get into, but I ended up designing the lighting for my tour. I was only supposed to be the electrician, but things don't always work out like they're planned. This was the light board at one of the theaters that we went into. And I am almost certain that big crank at the bottom was the house light dimmer, which is pretty cool.
Those are crazy. I've seen one of those in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. one of our other guests talked about one of these recently, but like this was the light board and it takes up a whole wall, and like
Yeah.
every switch, every lever is like controlling, is like a big mechanical resistor that's re- reducing how much electricity like gets to the light bulb wherever it's
Yeah.
added to, or the series of light bulbs. And it's absolutely
Yeah.
insane. Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
And
Tom Bell was talking about these a little bit, like when he was doing like rock and rollers back in the like early 70s, like making the change from this to like a light board was just like mind blowing.
yeah. To be able to just use your finger to change a level. Um, I will say one of the things that I enjoyed the most on tour was some of these extremely old houses that we went into, especially we went into a few with hemp rigging systems, and a few of them, despite being ancient, they had these union crews that knew the place inside and out. They, even with the hemp rigging or the old school lighting control, all you had to do was tell them what you were looking to achieve and they would help you. And, what's that? You want 2 colors of side light? Okay, well, we have these over here and let's make it happen. Um, so, it's there's talent all over the country, and if you go on tour, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Um, so after my final summer at Merry-Go-Round, instead of going back to NYC, I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon, and doing a season at Portland Center Stage. Um, and this was actually one of the I was just really struck by the lighting design for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest there. The woman, Diane, um, she just really fascinated me with what she was able to do to this hospital set. And I gotta say, being a master electrician for an amazing lighting designer is something that would never get old. And it's you know, I don't know if I'll ever go back to it, but I do miss it sometimes. Um, yeah, I never really thought that I had the artistic eye, but to be able to help somebody else achieve their vision um, is is really satisfying. And that's my buddy Tim sweeping the stage floor while I was doing my demo check.
Nice.
So uh, the last show I did in Oregon before that season closed was production of A Night with Janis Joplin. That was really cool. It was the world premiere. The show ended up transferring to Broadway after one more regional stop. So that was kind of cool. What you're seeing in the background is frosted plexiglass with must have been a 20K Christie projector behind it. And then they mapped all the, these were like factory windows was the idea.
So
So
there's no actual paneling in that at all?
it's frosted plexi.
Oh yeah, but
Yeah.
like, is that all framing, or did they projection map in the frame?
No, the framing exists. So
Oh,
it was probably like steel, welded, must have been like 3/8 box tube,
okay.
pretty thin. Um, this scene shop there was all the way from the TD to the carps and everybody in between. They were really exceptional. Um, they churned out professional quality stuff with no drama, and there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was kind of cool. That was when I worked there was when ETC EOS line of boards was sort of the latest and greatest thing starting to be rolled out, but they didn't have the money to buy one. So I programmed this show on an Obsession 2, which was A challenge, but we made it happen. So that's me sitting at my place.
Nice.
And so this particular event we had a TEDx talk. So you just never, working in theater, you never know what you're going to run into. You could be doing Janis Joplin the musical, or you could be doing a TED talk. And so that was Portland, and then I moved back to upstate New York. I was offered a full-time job to launch a theater festival in Auburn, New York, at my former company. So they already had one venue, and I was sort of brought on to help coordinate opening 2 additional spaces. So this was one of them. This was a converted carriage house at a art and history museum that was in town. So prior, this was a big empty room, and we worked with them, and they built a stage and put up lights, and then we started doing shows there. And then we rented there's a smaller theater company in town called Auburn Public Theater, and we rented their space and rented a package, and we did a few seasons there. So there were a lot of logistics in order to make that happen. We actually had to renovate their dressing rooms to get them equity compliant. So I took a very active role in doing that. And by very active, I mean actually tearing down walls and putting up new ones by myself. We left them with better dressing rooms than we found when we got there. So this is merry-go-round / the theater festival scene shop. I don't know what you guys have. This is a 60 by 80 pole barn. The area where I'm standing is kind of a props working area. You can see the couches at the break area. Over underneath barbecue is a big welding area. They would typically have the shields up, but we obviously nobody was working at the time I took this picture. And lumber storage around to the back left, and big, nice big table saw with the 4-foot table, and then all the way to sort of the left of the frame, they had an area for props to do their work. And then they had another identical sized structure right behind this one that was just all paint deck and storage. So pretty. You would think that having two buildings this size would wow, that's a lot of space. Oh my gosh, it felt like they never had enough space. And theater companies tend to collect stuff.
Yeah, we've been doing some serious house cleaning with the referendum, and just so much old stuff that people had saved forever that somebody must have had some sort of emotional connection to, or you thought they were going to use again, but
yeah,
kind of time to start with a fresher slate, at least. Our scene shop actually just doubled in size with the referendum, but that was at the cost of some dedicated storage. So definitely going to be a new adventure in organization, and trying to keep less junk on hand.
Yeah, it's tough. And when I was there, I found that I was constantly trying to negotiate with, the powers that be. I know that we have been holding on to this set for 3 years, thinking that somebody was going to rent it from us, but nobody has, and we're paying for storage. It's got to go. So I also when they launched their festival, my role became more like facilities. So this is us replacing the stage floor after the plywood had gotten too cut up from 10 years of musicals. And that was the new one when we finished it. Um, Put up mirrors in a rehearsal hall. I did a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes at a theater company just to keep the place operating.
Mhm.
Um, so I did that for a while, I until 2017. Um, some of the productions, this was Saturday Night Fever, that was a premiere. Um, we One thing that you'll find is, I'm sure in the bigger cities too, but also in theaters in these smaller towns, the community is willing to pitch in and help you. And we had a welding shop that we had a good relationship with. We welded these, and by we, I mean people who I worked with, not me. Welded all these trusses, but we had a shop and they ended up doing it for free.
Wow.
Cut every one of those pieces, which was, I mean, there's just no way. We didn't have the right saw to do it, and even if we did, we didn't have time. And I mean, there must have been 1,000 of them,
Wow.
and they did the cut list for us, and they did it for free. And favors like that is sometimes how you can make these shows happen. Um, so, oh, sorry. Um, so I into um, moved into more of an educational role. I got engaged to my wife, and to be honest with you, I was after so many years of theater, I started to get a little bit burned out, which can happen to people in the arts. And I on kind of a whim, I applied for a job at a college. Um, that was an AV job, and uh, and I got it. So one of the first things I did when I started working there, they were like, "Oh, hey, theater guy, we're renovating our auditorium. Can you help us?" And I looked at, they were like starting to tear down their old stuff, and I looked at the plans for the lighting and the sound systems in the new venue and made some suggestions based on what I had seen working in theater for so many years. So right off the bat, you know, I was, even though working in educational AV, I was able to put my theater skills to the test, and or to use rather. Um, so so this was the auditorium that we renovated, and I got a big kick out of this. Shortly after it was finished, they had a guest lecturer come in, and she was the costume designer for Black Panther,
Mhm.
um, the film, and she was fascinating. Um, so I always find it really satisfying when you work on a project like that, and then it opens up, and you see a powerhouse like that up on the stage using the technology that you just finished implementing. Um, so I promise I'm almost done with the career part. I worked I worked at Cortland for 2.5 years. Cut my time a little bit short there. I would have loved to have stayed. I saw a job open up at Cornell University, which is only 45 minutes from my home. And it was kind of one of those, this isn't going to crop up again anytime soon. I was happy at Cortland, but I just felt like I should apply for this job at Cornell. And I got it. So um, now I do AV at Cornell. And it's I use my theater skills every day. It's very different than working in theater, but there are some things like project management and being able to make or work off of an accurate drawing or um, understanding visuals that apply whether you're working on a play or working in a classroom. And I found that this has been a really good fit for me. Um, I One of the things that struck me at first was working in educational AV. There is no skilled operator for these systems. So even though the systems are very advanced, it's okay. You set up a really elaborate system for play, and you hire a light board op and a soundboard op, and professionals to, or at least knowledgeable people to come in and operate that equipment. The equipment that I am responsible for now is being operated by faculty members who their specialty is teaching business.
Mhm.
So they don't care about the difference between HDMI and USB-C. They just want the thing to work.
Mhm.
So it's a very different world where I'm responsible for all these systems, and they have to work 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, but I can't be in the room to make sure that they're working. So you
Mhm.
have to set your stuff up so well that anybody can use it and not break it. And that has been, it's challenging, but it's not boring. I think I thought when I started working in educational AV that I was going to be like plugging HDMI cables into projectors and making sure that the projector was on the right source.
Mhm.
And it is so much more than that. so, um, so that's one of our classrooms. We also we have a lecture hall like this, uh, and a different one of our classrooms. And, and this applies to theater too. So what we're finding in educational AV is that all of our signaling is going to network based now. So rather than sending video over a coaxial SDI cable, it's basically a stream, and I'm sure that that's going to be happening in the theater world, or is happening. I'm sure in some cases already. Audio, the same thing. We're not running microphone cable all over the place anymore. We are running network cable, and everything plugs into a network switch. So, and
Yeah, that's where we're moving when we get back in there too. Like we're going a lot of Dante stuff.
yeah,
Still have some analog lines in the main space, but all the new like video monitoring and like paging, and there's going to be a video recording studio elsewhere in the building that they're running lines between so that they can like live stream
yeah,
talks and stuff like that. So um we're on our way to starting to deal with that in the near future for sure.
yeah. And so, and when you put your AV equipment on the network, whether it's in a performance facility or in a classroom, it opens a lot of doors. You can now send these signals to anything else that is connected to the same network. But you have to be network competent. So I never would have guessed that I was going to almost become a computer network engineer. But you can't do what I do now without at least having some understanding of it. And of course, we have a whole team of people whose entire job it is to maintain the network, but you have to be able to tell them what it is that you're looking for in terms that they can understand. Um, so it's been I feel like I'm catching up, and I have a lot more catching up to do. I'm sure I'll spend the rest of my career just trying to fully embrace networking. Um,
Yeah, I feel like that's something I'm behind the curve on and need to start figuring out.
And it changes, right? The security is a huge consideration. So as soon as you get used to doing it one way, somebody figures out how to hack that way, and then you have to start doing it the new way. So this is I don't expect this to mean too much to an untrained eye, but this is just an example of this is only the beginning, sort of the input stage of a digital signal sound processor, known as a DSP in one of our classrooms. So I never would have thought before I started doing this that a classroom could have, this many inputs, this much processing, and as many outputs as we have just for sound alone. But when you're implementing video conferencing and lecture recording, it can get everything has to also have hearing assist capability, so it can actually get pretty involved. Um, so just a little diagram. NDI is one of the protocols that we can use to send video signals over the network now, and Zay mentioned Dante, which is audio. Um, Although I think I heard that Dante's trying to break in the video
Hmm.
also. Um, so it's a whole new world. When I learned how to do sound, it was XLR cables, and we still use them, but only to get to the Dante box,
Yeah.
and then it's on the network from there. Um, so it's just an example of what what a video distribution system that I deal with every day could look like, where you've got sources on the left, and it all feeds into a network switch, and then we direct those streams to the displays that we want them to go to. Um, it's flexible, but it's a lot. So this is kind of been my last, I don't know, few months. We're opening a new facility in New York City with 4 classrooms, and this is just the spreadsheet I'm showing you has 200 and something rows, but you have to keep track of all this stuff, right? So these are all devices that are on the network just for AV in this facility, and somebody has to keep track of you know what all their addresses are, what VLANs they're on, what switch they're plugged into. Do they need PoE? How much PoE do they draw? But going back to the theater thing, okay, well, this isn't so unlike doing your light right paperwork for a big
Mhm.
plot, right? So yes, that the attributes that I'm keeping track of are different, but um, at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you are putting in the provisions for what needs to be hooked up. So um, I feel like doing so many years of light right for lighting plots is what makes me able to do this without too much grief. So um, so it's kind of my career, how I started and where I've gone with it.
Yeah, that's great. That was really in depth, and you've done a lot. You've moved around quite a bit too. It's cool. Um, Nice. So, like, what advice do you have for kids coming up that are like looking to pursue kind of like a lighting, but also just like a technical theater thing? Like, you definitely mentioned the networking, like that's been touched on a couple times. Like, computer protocol and network system is a good thing to wrap your head around sooner than later. It sounds like, but what other
Yeah.
stuff?
I mean, I think being a good technician is really important so that you can actually make your equipment work, but it, it only will take you so far, and it is every bit as important to also be uh, an agreeable person who um, you're going to work with people who have all different backgrounds, who have all different ideas and different work ethics and different ways of doing things. And what I wish somebody had hammered into my head earlier was, um, if you want to make it far, if you want to go far, you have to get along with all those different types of people. And um, for me, one of the most important things is separating um, my work life from my personal life. So you don't have to love everybody you work with, but you still need to work with them, and you can choose whether you're going to make that a miserable experience. So um, or a positive experience. And I'm telling you, it is so much easier um, to to make it a positive or it's not easier to make it a positive experience, but you will go home at the end of the day so much happier if you do. And um, that's the part that I've had to learn. I've always had a knack for technology. Um, I, you know, I definitely had to learn how to work with all different types of people, and I feel like the better I get at that, the better I am as a AV professional.
Yeah.
Other than that, keep be curious and don't be afraid to look into the things that you're curious about. So if programming is something that interests you, well, then learn how to program. Learn C sharp or learn JavaScript or learn how to program a light board. It doesn't matter. You will use those skills. If it's something you're interested in, you will find a job where you can put that to work. And it may be in theater and it may not be. If painting is something that you're interested in, then paint. I know a girl who uh, intended to become a theater scenic painter, and she did that really well for a number of years. And then she got in with somebody who restores murals in New York City and like on the sides of buildings and the subway, whatever. And she's done really well with that. So, just try to, always keep an open mind about what you would like to do and be open about any opportunities where you can apply the skills that you gain doing what you like.
Nice. Yeah, for sure. I'd second all of that. Do you have anything like kind of specific to like a college path, like looking at a program, or like, some folks have talked about like kind of more the conservancy style schools versus like a liberal arts university, like looking at like how you identify a program, like looking for something that's like specific versus more broad, and I think that's a personal choice, and how it works out for a lot of people, but just like if there's anything
Sure.
on that front.
Yeah. And I wouldn't I wouldn't tell somebody to go one way or the other. I will say that I went to public university where we all did a lot of everything. Yes, I did mostly lighting, but I have no regrets about that at all. Um, I know plenty of people who have gone to private, much more expensive schools, and some of them are designing on Broadway now. So if that's what you want, um, I would not tell you to not do it. Um, but uh, it, when I went and visited the college that I went to, I just knew as soon as I set foot on that campus that that's where I wanted to go to school. And I think only not to not answer your question, but only you can really determine what is going to be right for you, right?
Mhm.
So, I would say your parents are very wise, but ultimately you have to do what feels like the right thing for you. Um, I would warn you about, um, I think a lot of people that I have met working in the arts have some regret about taking on a lot of debt and then going into the arts field, because chances are you're not going to make a ton of money. Um, so if I were to offer any word of caution, it would be against taking on six-figure debt and then going into the arts.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. Like it, if you, yeah, that's definitely a ratio to consider as you move forward with the
Yeah,
rest of your life for sure. So that is it's definitely a good thing to keep in mind.
I mean, I bought a house, not an expensive house by any means, but I bought a house when I was 30. I would not have been able to do that if I had gone to one of the really expensive schools.
Yeah.
But you have to do what works for you, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool. Um, And then kind of the final question we've been talking about is just like some of the change that you see in the industry and like coming in the industry. And I think that like that networking thing is definitely touched on it. And we've talked about like LED and like projection getting more integrated. Is there anything specific in like a technology that you kind of see coming down the pipe?
Hmm.
Um, or even like
Yeah.
kind of we talked about some of the changes with like COVID protocols, like like how I think auditions are going to like a virtual audition or like a digital submission is probably going to be something that sticks around for a while.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I I guess my fear, and I don't think that this will play out, but I hope that COVID doesn't make people reluctant to go to see a live performance in the future, because that would be tragic.
Yeah,
Um, I, I'm hoping that COVID is kind of a one-off and we never experience this again in our lifetimes.
yeah, that'd be okay.
Yeah. um, I can't speak. Nothing really comes to mind as far as technology changes in the industry that we haven't already covered. Yes, everything is on the network now. Become a network person by all means. Understand LEDs by all means. But on a from a different standpoint, I think I don't know if you noticed this at all, Zane, but I was sort of fascinated in the last couple years that I was still doing theater. It seemed like there was starting to be a lot more conversations happening about um, theater employees and having a fulfilling work life balance. And I think that as young people, you guys have an opportunity uh, to be part of a change in the industry where uh, people are now talking about how burnt out you could get working for theater companies. And yeah, I'll admit I was a victim of that. I could have stayed in it. I chose not to, but I could have. And maybe if I stayed in it, I would have gotten the opportunity to be part of that change that I wanted to see. But I think, I would tell young people who are going to theater, don't ever be afraid to stand up for yourself. Um, no, when I was in management positions, I had a few employees stand up to me, and it actually made me a better manager and a better person when they did. Um, and yeah, you're not going to make great art, and if you're burned out. So um, I look forward to. I think COVID has thrown a huge wrench in the works, but it felt to me like those conversations were really starting to happen right before COVID, and at the end of the previous presidential administration, there was a pretty sweeping overtime law passed that I was really looking forward to. Unfortunately, it was overturned, but perhaps it'll come back in some form. Um, so it, you know, yes, keep up with technology, and also just look out for yourself.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of something I think Mike Pontier told me first was the golden triangle of the good, fast, cheap.
Yeah,
Pick
yeah,
two.
yeah,
And that's something I've always like taken through when you're talking about like building something or putting something together. But I think that's finally come back to the people, like you said, you like the technicians, the actors, the performers, like the people that are actually putting on this show. Like it can't be good, fast, and cheap for very
yeah,
long. Like
yeah,
so.
yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Michael. I think we'll kind of end the recording there and invite everybody back to kind of ask any questions. But thanks so much for sharing, and thanks for all the visuals. Like that was really great, super informative. So appreciate
Cool,
it.
cool, absolutely.